Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Sci-Frights, the film discussion podcast at the Interzone where horror meets science fiction. I am one of your hosts, Liam Dunn, and with me as always is Dr. Lindsay Hallam.
Hello. So we've finished our first season where we looked at the legacy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and we went off in some really odd, different directions with that. And so now this is our second season, and we'll get into what this second season's all about and what we're talking about today. But I guess before that, we should just mention a couple of things, a couple of general things about us and about what's happening in our lives. Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing is a film that we made, They Called Me David, is now available on Arrow Player.
I know, it's amazing.
I know.
I can't believe it.
I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with Arrow a few times on some of their Blu-ray releases, doing video essays and commentaries and things. But an actual film that we've made is on there and on the Arrow Player with all their other amazing films. And so it's quite strange to actually have our film on there. So it's a sci-fi horror, which is in fitting with the podcast. I realize now more and more it's a very Frankensteinian story. Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell us a bit about what They Called Me David is about? Because you wrote it.
Well, yeah. Well, I want people to watch it, but it started out as a bit of flash fiction that I wrote. So a very, very short story, which I adapted into a script as part of further experiments, I suppose, we were doing with Super 8 cameras. We had some Super 8 cameras and we were able to get some film and send those off to be developed and whatnot and digitized and things like that. So we were mucking about with the camera and thought, well, let's try and shoot something with it. So I adapted this script, and it's sort of the first-person point of view of a young person who has been raised in a laboratory, who has developed some strange powers, and it's about them sort of coming of age in its way, coming into their power, literally and figuratively, and about how they exercise that power against their captors. And so it's also about scientific hubris. A lot of things we were talking about with the Frankenstein season, every scientist thinking whether or not they could and not stopping to think if they should. Yeah. But it's all from the point of view of the main character. So the camera is the eyes of, except there's a few little cutaways and stuff, but for the majority of it, it's that.
Yeah. So, we really leaned into the whole lo-fi aspect of it with the use of the Super 8 cameras and the fact that it just has this timeless quality to it. And so we wanted it to really look like something maybe from the atomic age, this lost artifact as well. So please check it out. It's only 6 minutes long.
Yeah.
A couple of people have put reviews or rated it on Letterboxd. I like that someone left a comment saying that this is like a supervillain origin story, whereas I kind of think that David isn't a supervillain, isn't a villain at all. They are just a child.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's one thing. I guess another thing that's going on is you are part of a film club. You've been doing some film programming.
Yes.
And in conjunction with Sci-Frights, we had an amazing screening. Can you tell us about that?
We did that. Myself and my friend Brogan. Hello, Brogan, if you're listening. We do a sort of bi-monthly. We try to make it bi-monthly screening series in London called Distorted Frame, which focuses on digital cinema, so films shot on digital cameras. And we've done screenings of 28 Days Later, the Spanish horror film Wreck, Steven Soderbergh's Unsane, and to commemorate the sad passing of the late great David Lynch, we organised a screening of Inland Empire, which is entirely shot on digital, and we did that at the Victoria pub in East London, in Dalston. We made it a big event, so it wasn't just screening the film. We had your good self doing an introduction as our resident Lynch expert. We had DJs, amazing DJs playing Lynch songs from Lynch films and by Lynch himself. We had a door prize where we raffled off some prizes. Special thanks to our friends at Blue Rose Magazine for providing some copies of their final ever issue to some lucky prize winners. And yeah, it was a massive, massive day. It was a Sunday sold out screening. Saturday afternoon, evening it was. Sunday afternoon, evening. And it was amazing. And thanks to everyone who came down. And it was great to sort of do a great big screening with Distorted Frame, but also involve the podcast as well.
Yeah.
And have it be a big party and event about one of our cinematic heroes.
Yes. I mean, we need to do a Lynch episode at some point.
Yes.
There's all these different directors that we need to do episodes about. I guess other things, I've got a new job. I am the course leader of the Film and Screen Studies degree at the London College of Communication, which is part of the University of the Arts London. So I've just started there. And I guess another thing is we went away to Italy and I finally got to see the Profondo Rosso store, which is a store in Rome run by Luigi Cozzi, who is a director of Italian horror films. He's also been an assistant director, worked extensively with Dario Argento. Always wanted to go there, and have a couple of times I've tried to go there. It's been closed or I didn't end up getting there. So I was just like, yes, we're finally here. We finally get to go. And then something happened. There's this little museum, I guess you would call it, down the bottom with all these recreations of different scenes from Italian horror films. It's quite a short, it's just kind of a corridor you walk down, and at the side there's these different mannequins and pieces of, I guess, sets from Italian horror films. And then we got to the end of the corridor and
I proposed to you.
Yes. Yeah. So that I did not see that coming. And it was, when I stopped laughing, I said yes, because it was kind of perfect. But yeah, so lots of life stuff happening.
I will say it was great to propose in Rome and not like on a bridge overlooking the river or by the Vatican, but in a chintzy chamber of horrors beneath a horror movie store.
It was only fitting. I mean, it was worth us waiting because, we've been together for 20 years. It was worth waiting 20 years to finally get to Profondo Rosso store and then that happened. Yeah. All right. So this new season. So you mentioned that They Called Me David, our film. So you wrote it, I directed it. And you're working on other scripts. And you have a script idea that you've been tooling around with. I don't know how much you want to say about it, but just in terms of, because our first season was about the legacy of Frankenstein, and a lot of that had to do also with classes that I did for the course, the module that I'm no longer doing at University of East London. So we thought that this season is something to do with what you're working on, which is this script. And we kind of came up with the theme. So I don't know if you just want to talk about, I don't know how much you want to say about your script or how we came up with the theme for this season and what the theme is.
Well, I won't say too much because it's all very much still very rough draft stages, even just in my mind, and notes and things written down. But it's basically about AI, because AI is this big thing that's happening right now. I mean, we just saw 2 stand-up comedy shows back to back, and both comedians had whole bits on AI. So it's very much coming up in the creative industries, in cinema, TV, comedy, art. Everybody's very concerned about humanity's rush to accept what is being called AI, and how it can kind of erase. We're in danger of erasing ourselves and our culture, and its contributions to climate change and things like that. So. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that going around in my mind. So, and I think the film we're talking about today is going to be a big influence on that. So we thought as a way to kind of explore different themes around AI and technology in general. I think we're not going to stick too closely to artificial intelligence, because I think there are broader things we can discuss as well about kind of techno-fear, technophobias, and the way film, sci-fi and horror explore those themes. I thought it would be a good way to kind of to help me with this writing project of thinking way different other different films have tackled the same sort of subject matter. And so we've planned out a series of episodes where, you know, we match a horror to a sci-fi and discuss different aspects of that. So with today's episode, we're doing something a little bit different. This is a bit of a taster, I suppose, of what's to come, a taste of things to come. We're only talking about one film, but you know, it's a lot of film. It's a full meal.
Yep.
And it's like the granddaddy of all science fiction movies. It is, of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick. Everything that came after about you know, every space movie, science fiction, AI story owes a massive debt to this film. Without this launched everything that came after. It's also my favourite film of all time.
Yes.
And when we were planning out the season, I was like, oh, there's nowhere for this film to go. But then how do you match it to anything, really?
I know, yeah.
Because it's such a singular film of it sits on its own. Like Kubrick himself, he never really was part of any big cinematic movement. He was just always Kubrick, wasn't he? Always sat by himself. And this film sits by itself. This is almost like a prologue, an overture, if you will.
There you go.
Of the season. And we're just going to focus on what I think is the greatest film ever made, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah. I think this may be the one film I've seen most in the cinema.
The first time I saw it was in 2001 because it got a re-release because of the year. And my dad took me and my older brother to see it. This was back in Perth in Australia. And I was like, you know, I'd heard about the film and I'd seen bits and pieces, obviously. But then I really wasn't prepared for what I was about to watch. And afterwards, I was just completely blown away by it, absolutely gobsmacked. And just the craft, and I mean, we'll go into this, but just the craft involved in making that film is what makes it so incredible. I think that every frame of that film has been crafted by hand. And that's just wild.
Yeah. It's funny because I also was introduced to the film by my dad. It's a total dad.
It's an ultimate dad film.
Yeah, the ultimate dad film. I just remember him explaining the film before I watched it and going through pretty much the whole entire film, which I think was good because then when I watched it, I wasn't just like, huh? My dad kind of explaining a lot of it to me helped a lot the first time I couldn't for the life of me remember when I saw it. I would have seen it on video for the first time, so nothing like your first viewing, which is the ideal first viewing. I remember liking it because it must have been around the time where I was just devouring films and just getting into cinema. I remember though my mom, I think she went to see it she did go to see it at the cinema. I don't know if it was the initial release in like 68, 69 or other subsequent re-releases. And she kind of told me about how she went with her, she has two sisters, one's a year older than her and one's, I don't know how much younger her younger sister is, but she's quite a bit younger. And they're taking the younger sister along and they were expecting, like a lot of people at the time when it first came out, they probably were expecting a space adventure movie, like a Star Wars type thing, even though this was way before Star Wars. And I think she even said something like with they had the intermission and like her younger sister, my Auntie Karen, like almost was crying, like she just did not want to go back in. So I think they were so bored. I mean, if it was three young girls expecting a space adventure movie and seeing that, yeah, I can imagine that, yeah, it wouldn't be what you wanted to see and you would just be baffled. And it is a very slow film. I've talked about the film a lot in, being a film lecturer. You use 2001. It comes up a lot, especially in the module that I did on horror and science fiction. And I always kind of ask students, who's seen 2001? And still to this day, a lot of them still do watch it. And then I follow up with who likes it and who doesn't. And it's always split 50-50 between students. Some of them really love it. And then there's always a lot of students that, they're like, oh, it was boring. A lot of students actually have admitted that they didn't even make it to the end. The thing is, it was this big Hollywood film, but it's very much an art film.
Yeah.
Within the genre trappings, especially coming in from the 50s, and into the 60s. Hollywood science fiction were basically B movies, creature features. I was reading an interview with Arthur C. Clarke, and he said that, previous to making this film, science fiction films have always meant monsters and sex. So we have tried to find another term for our film. So it's almost like they didn't want to use the term science fiction as they were making the film and discussing the film. And it was always that, the science fiction was seen as, a B movie. And now science fiction is the big budget, I guess, A pictures, if you want to say, the big blockbusters. They've got all the money behind them. And previously they were the B movie. They were often maybe like low budget films, and they had these preposterous monsters. And it's interesting that Arthur C. Clarke said, it's always meant monsters and sex, because I've said previously that, science fiction is often seen as this sexless genre. But yes, I guess another aspect of a lot of the 50s films would have been, probably scantily clad women. Like, I think almost like Forbidden Planet, and that you've got the young girl, and that is a very horny movie where she's like walking around, like all these men arrive on this planet and she's immediately like, oh yeah. So this film was very different to a lot of science fiction that had really been made previously to that.
It treated it seriously, and it made it adult. It made it okay for adults to watch it. Like, it didn't feel like kid stuff.
Yeah, like teen drive-in movie or something like that.
Double feature silliness. It was like, we're going to treat this seriously, and it's something to be marveled at.
And and the thing is, science fiction films are always seen as less serious than science fiction literature. I mean, there's this very famous article written by Susan Sontag called The Imagination of Disaster. And she's talking mostly about 1950s style science fiction films. And she said, that science fiction literature is about science. But she said science fiction films are not about science. They are about disaster, and about how they are about these spectacles. And I think she talks about like sensuous elaboration. This whole thing of that it is making it more kind of physical and visceral, in that it is the spectacle of the special effects, the explosions and monsters and chases and things, which is interesting because 2001 is about science, but it is so sensory as well that it's not plot driven. It is maybe more like science fiction literature, but then also science fiction literature, I guess, was always marginalized as well. That was often, I guess, looked down upon.
At least to begin with, I think,
Yeah, not seen as like literature, proper literature. You've read a lot about the film. If you could just talk about like how this film came to be made, the fact that both Kubrick and Clarke were almost rejecting what science fiction cinema had been previously, how this film actually came about.
Like you said, Kubrick wanted to make the first quote-unquote really good science fiction movie, and he said a story that dramatizes nothing less than the origins and destiny of man. So he had this idea already that he wanted this broad canvas in which to tell this story, and he wanted to like throw everything he had at it, all the bells and whistles. I think he got introduced to the stories of Arthur C. Clarke, and I mean, I'm sure he probably read a whole bunch of other science fiction authors in research, or had people at least give him notes on one, I don't know. But he obviously ended up choosing Arthur C. Clarke because I think he had the scientific acumen, I suppose, but also he was a very, very good storyteller. Whereas I think some science fiction writers were really good at the science stuff, and others were really good at the story, but they didn't have that je ne sais quoi that kind of brought them together. I mean, whenever they talk about Arthur C. Clarke, apparently he, in one story, he wrote about basically a satellite network before it ever existed. And then, of course, eventually that's what we have, like telecommunication satellites all speaking to each other and things like that. So he was able to see things that would happen in the future rather than just be like rockets to the moon, and space aliens. It was always thought out and almost predictive in some ways. So I think he was able to bring those together. And I don't think he quite knew Kubrick quite knew exactly how he wanted to write, how he wanted it to be written. I think he expected Clarke to just kind of bang out a screenplay, but then Clarke was like, I'm not a screenwriter. All I know how to do is write prose. So then they decided, Kubrick decided, you can write me a story then, and we'll work it out, and we'll write basically a book. Just got to find the quote, but he has there's this great book, Space Odyssey, by Michael Benson, which, thanks Dad, my dad got me this book as well. It's quite an interesting thing that he says about the process of basically they were writing the novel of 2001 before to then turn into a screenplay.
Yeah, so it's a weird thing of like that the book comes out after the film. Yeah. But it's not like it's novelizations, which novelizations were already happening at that time. So it is a really interesting process.
Because like Kubrick, basically, pretty much, I think every movie he made was more or less, the majority anyway, were based on books.
Yes, adaptations, yeah.
He adapted books, but this is the one where it actually, like, they had to write the book before and then adapt it. So like they worked together really closely to develop this story. And I think even when they started shooting, he was still trying to figure out the ending and stuff like that. And I think there's even a funny story where it was like Christmas, and Arthur C. Clarke kind of turned in his latest draft, and Kubrick went, "Oh, this is great. This is enough for me to work on. You're fired." And basically severed, like financially compensated him, but was like, "Your services are no longer needed." But then realized, like, weeks or months later that, oh no, I need him back. So he hired him back again because he realized, oh no, we still need to work on the story. This is a quote from Kubrick from this book. He said, I decided trying to do an original story in screenplay form was, in a sense, putting the cart before the horse. In order to write a good screenplay, you have to not only know what you want to say, know what your ideas are, but you've got to figure out how to dramatize the idea. In other words, how to make the idea implicit in the action or the emotional structure of the story. While you're still trying to work out the ideas, it is rather paralyzing to, at the same time, have to work out how you will dramatize them. You are drawn to scenes which suggest themselves and seem interesting, but which may not really be accurate as far as what you are trying to say. On the other hand, if you work in the novel form, it is not necessary to be concerned with the method of dramatizing the idea. Then when the story is written and everything is there, you can start all over again to synthesize the dramatic structure from the much looser and freer and longer form of the novel. This may be why so few good original screenplays are ever written.
And of course, there was also the short story, The Sentinel, that's a kind of a jumping point, isn't it?
Well, I think Clarke sold Kubrick a bunch of short stories, that being one of them, and it's considered the one that is the most directly influenced on the finished product, because it's basically like a mining team on the moon, and one of the main character, the protagonist, sees this like shining object off in the distance, and he climbs up this mountain to try and find what it is, and he finds this crystal pyramid buried in the rock. It's covered by this force field, and then it kind of jumps to 20 years in the future, and they've finally broken through the force field to access this thing. And there's this signal coming off it. Basically, an alien civilization saw the potential of humankind, buried this on the moon so that they didn't want to just land and talk to whoever was on the planet. They wanted to make sure that the human race got to a certain point, a technological point, where they could find this object, and then it would basically tell this ancient civilization that humanity was now at this point. So, and it's very ambiguous at the end about what would happen when the aliens came to find them. He was basically saying, could this be the a stepping stone for humanity to explore space? Or could the aliens be coming to just kill us all? And it ends on a very ambiguous note. So that's translated in the film when they excavate the black monolith on the moon. Yeah.
Have you read the novel or the short story?
Yeah, I've read the short story. And I've read 2001, the book, yeah.
So from what I can understand, because I haven't read either, that there's a lot more explanation in the novel, and the whole thing in the film is that there's much more ambiguity. I'm assuming you watched the film and then read the novel?
Yeah, but I read the novel years and years and years ago.
Yeah.
But the story's pretty much the same, and I think there's just certain flourishes and I think some deeper, more sort of interior stuff with the astronauts and with Hayward Floyd and things like that. The thing is, I think he wrote subsequent sequel novels, which I haven't read. Although I did read 3001, The Final Odyssey, which is like the last one, which actually tries to explain everything and what it all is.
Yeah, because I think that the whole thing about the film is that there is no clear explanation for anything. And I think there was even interviews where Kubrick has said that he kind of wanted to get more into, I guess, the subconscious. And the whole thing about the film is that it just does wash over you, and it's very much the vibes that, you know, there is a very much this slow pace, and you're just taking it in, and it is all this sensory experience. It isn't about this tightly plotted thing or about explaining anything, because the whole thing of like what's great about this film and about a lot of Kubrick films, like I'm thinking of mostly of The Shining, is that they really do create all these different interpretations, and it goes back to, you know, my favorite guy, Lynch, who really greatly admired Stanley Kubrick, and Kubrick apparently rated Razorhead as like one of his favorite films or his favorite film, and that both of them are about, I'm not going to explain this to you. I want you to bring yourself to it. There's this thing about, you know, this film that you can go into every single aspect of the film and like, maybe this means this, and everything becomes so full of meaning or portent. And I think it is why these films, that some people so connect with them so much, because I always say with Lynch, it's that those gaps or those things that aren't explained, you fill in with yourself. And, you know, this film, it is thinking about things on such a wide cosmic level, about the nature of humanity, of where we come from and where we're going to, and what does it mean to even be human, that you can go off in all these different directions, which we're going to get into. But also, you know, the making of the film, because I think pretty much most Kubrick films take years, don't they?
I think it started like he and Clark meet in like 1963 or something, so like 5 years before the film's actually released. And production, I think, was like 66, 67. But before that was a lot of experimenting and things, and just trying to figure out how to do all this stuff, because it had never been done before. Just to sell the film to MGM, they had basically Clark's script or the galleys of this novel. And they also did all these camera tests of that, because they watched this short film called Universe, which used all this animation to show like galaxies colliding and stuff. And one of the processes they used was they would fill these tanks with paint thinner and then drop oils into them, which would create all these strange shapes and make it look like nebulas and things like in deep space. And so Kubrick went and recreated those things using his own techniques, but the same methodology really, and so shot his own little sizzle reel of these effects. So as part of the pitch, they would have the story and they would have these special effects to say this is what we're going for. And weirdly enough, Universe was narrated by Douglas Rain, who ends up voicing Hal. So that was the sort of impetus for it, was I want to make this grand science fiction film. I'm going to use special effects that you've never seen before on a massive scale. And they just went forward with that.
I mean, the way it looks, it still is just stunning. Maybe it's just simply because, like you said before, it's made by hand. Yeah. That this is obviously way before using computer graphics, CGI and all that stuff. And it just looks better. Yeah. It really does.
Well, a great little excerpt I got from that book was apparently Kubrick's always said there are 3 factors to consider when making any film. Was it interesting? Was it believable? And was it beautiful or aesthetically superior? So he would live or die by every shot. It's almost like every shot of film is like, this could be the last I ever do. And it's just, everything is so painstakingly crafted and forged and shot. When making the special effects, they didn't want to keep running the same film through by layering effects, because you get the image degrades. So they would do it like, they basically have one camera negative and just keep applying things. So they basically would then print the film as one thing, rather than like print the film, do another layer, print the film, do another layer. Yeah. So they worked out this technique, so they just had to basically run off one master at the end, and it would have all the effects on it. And so there'd be this pristine image. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why it was 2018 when Christopher Nolan re-released it in 70mm as the unrestored cut. Like it didn't need restoration.
Yeah.
They found the original negative and they just ran prints off it. And it was so well kept and so in such great quality that they didn't need to do anything to it. And it was a, 50-year-old film or whatever by that point. They call it first pass believability. And when you think about some of the shots in it, one of my favorite shots is I think when, we could talk about it later, but where they show inside the docking bay of the space station, and it's this massive, obviously this model, but you see these little windows where all these people are working.
I love that. Yes.
And it's just incredible how they pull that off, because they would have blacked out the bits where the people would have been and shot it. And apparently they had this camera system called the worm, which would lock the camera down into these particular movements. So then they always knew where the camera was going to be and how the shot was going to work, and it would basically run automatically because you'd lock in the positions beforehand. And it would just so they could do all these amazing special effects shots, and they would have blacked out the bits where the people are, shot them separately, and then just inserted them. And then it looks like a completely seamless scene.
Let's get into the film. So this is a film of very distinct segments and parts. One of the things with the unrestored cut with that Nolan oversaw that came out, perhaps 2017-18, was also bringing back the overture and the intermission and so on. So you have this overture and it's just a black screen, and it's is it Gheorghe Ligeti? Music. It's a piece of music called Atmospheres.
Yeah.
And his music plays a very important role throughout the film. And I remember, that piece of music, it's very ominous and very unsettling. So I was thinking, as we're watching the film and thinking about, for this podcast and how we're supposed to be about horror and science fiction, this is very much like the kind of purest science fiction film. But you could say that there are some scary elements or some almost horror elements. And I feel like he's choosing to open this film with this music, this black screen and this music, and it's very ominous, unsettling. But then you have the first images, it's the planet and the sun, and then you have the Thus Spake Zarathustra music, which is, it's iconic.
Yeah.
And then it goes into the Dawn of Man sequence.
Yes.
So the Dawn of Man sequence, how long? Is it 20 minutes or more than that? I'm not sure.
It's about that, 20,
yeah,
20 and change.
So you open, because I believe that it's about half an hour into the film before there's any dialogue.
Yeah.
So in many ways, you can imagine that would put a lot of people off, especially if they didn't know what they were getting into. And especially with this Dawn of Man sequence. So it's this sequence set before humans have evolved, and we see this group of apes just surviving in this vast landscape. You see them scrounging for food and water, and you see them, there's these animals, in particular these tapirs. Tapirs, they're kind of pig-like creatures, and you see them that when they're going for food and water, the animals, the tapirs are with them, so they're almost having to share, and so they're vegetarian. They're not eating other animals. In fact, they're potential prey for leopards, and at one point you do see one of the apes being attacked by leopards. So they're low down in the food chain. There's these scenes where they're all huddled in a cave, and they all look quite they can hear what's going on outside, and they're quite terrified. But then at one point you have this monolith appearing, and the apes are around the monolith, and one ape, who's called Moonwatcher in the book, but he's not referred to as Moonwatcher in the credits, I believe. But everyone refers to him as Moonwatcher now. He finds a bone and he starts smashing it on other bones, and then as he's smashing, and he's realized he's using these bones, and it's becoming a tool but also a weapon, because as he's smashing the bones, we're intercut with shots of these tapirs falling. So they start to become carnivores. They're starting to eat these other animals. Earlier, they'd encountered another group of apes and they just vocalized and made these somewhat threatening gestures. But then there was no violence. And then they have this meeting with, maybe it's the same group or another group, and they use the bone to kill this ape. And it's Moonwatcher, I think, who kills the other ape. But then all the other apes around also start kicking. And then, it ends with Moonwatcher sort of throwing the bone up in the air. So it's interesting that that this is before apes have evolved to humans. I guess just like why do we start here? Why do we start at the before humanity even exists?
It's Kubrick wanting to do a story about humanity and the origins and the possible future. And I think it's important to sort of start at the very beginning, I suppose, to tell this story, especially this story where it's about human evolution, but through the guidance of this otherworldly force. The whole idea of being able to use tools and weapons, changing the diet of the creatures allows then the creatures' brains and physiology to change. So it's like they can't really evolve while they're just eating nuts and berries and competing for resources. But once they can start eating meat, then they do get to the top of the food chain and they can start evolving and start gaining new knowledge and intellect, and new societies will start to spring up and things like that. So it's all about like how we started. We have to see where we're going by looking at where we started, and I think that the film does sort of sneakily discuss this in its way of like how, as further advanced we get as a society, we think we've moved beyond our violent roots and origins and, of scrabbling around in the dust and beating each other up with bones. But really,
that's still us.
It's still us. We still haven't shed those impulses, even though we are now, at least in the world of the film, flying around in spaceships and have hotels in orbit and things like that. And we think we're this great civilization, but we're still linked to that violent past. And the idea that these aliens or this alien force is guiding our evolutionary progress. The monolith appears and you see it's kind of linked up with the sun, like in that beautiful shot. And they start to touch it. The apes actually touch this monolith, which when they open up the sequence, you're seeing all the natural round rocks against this desert landscape. And it's all very naturalistic. And then suddenly this rectangular, obviously machined object appear, which is completely unnatural. But they touch this thing, and that Ligeti music starts up, which is very disturbing because it's this otherworldly force and we're not quite sure what its plans are. But by touching this monolith, they then gain this ability to see the bone on the floor as something more than just litter. They see it as this tool. So it's not, this alien force isn't handing us things on a plate. It's giving us like just that tiny little push in that direction. We talk about how this is Kubrick's most hopeful film for humanity, but he's also got there's this little thing in the background that's like, but we can't get there on our own. We need this otherworldly force to kind of push us off the edge, off the ledge.
And it does seem like we are, well, I guess in the Clark story, it is explained that it's from aliens. You could also, there's space for it to be, is it something divine? Is it a god or something beyond that's also appearing? Because, of course, the Bible is full of these visions and appearances and stuff. And I found this amazing quote. And he says, such cosmic intelligence growing in knowledge over the eons would be as far removed from man as we are from the ants. There could be instantaneous telepathic communication throughout the universe. They might have achieved total mastery over matter. In their ultimate form, they might exist as a disembodied, immortal consciousness throughout the universe. Once you begin discussing such possibilities, you realize that the religious implications are inevitable, because all the essential attributes of such extraterrestrial intelligence are the attributes we give to God. What we're dealing with here is, in fact, a scientific definition of God. And so this whole idea of, the monolith, it's something completely unnatural. It completely is in contrast to this natural world and this natural landscape. And I know, so in the Sentinel, there was a pyramid. And I believe that at first they wanted sort of translucent thing that had images projected on it, and then they realized that wasn't going to work, and then they came up with this idea of just this black monolith, and it's just so deep black it looks like almost like a void as well. But it also makes me think of the idea of my mobile phones. Like all our mobile phones look like it, and they kind of can control our lives now. This appearance of this monolith is what seems to spark this change or this evolution. But yeah, the fact that this evolution, so it is the bone is tool. He could have used this tool in another way, but the way he uses it is to kill.
Yeah.
So it's a tool, but it's primarily this weapon. And it's interesting that it's almost like this idea of evolution tied to violence. But then also when you think about violence, like our propensity for violence is also very kind of base and instinctual. But yet it's also this gateway to this evolution. It's this whole idea of that, I guess dominance and supremacy is established through violence. The fact that this is supposed to be Kubrick's most hopeful film, there is this, that is a really dark thing that the only way that humanity exerts power over the planet and all the species on the planet is primarily through our propensity for violence.
And that explains the match cut where the bone when the bone becomes the satellite. It's showing that this is like, you can't have these massive moments of change are kind of acts of violence as well. And I think space itself and the cosmos is one giant act of violence, like the Big Bang. It's like these, and it's almost saying it's just these forces coming into conflict with one another, which when they do create this whole new paradigm, and things are never the same after that, which is the journey that this film goes on, I think.
But just quickly, we should also just talk about the fact that this sequence, the apes in this sequence aren't obviously real apes, that they have people. So they had dancers and I think mimes.
Yeah.
And it's incredible what they do. And it's interesting that it was released the same year as the Planet of the Apes. And I believe the Planet of the Apes won like the special effects makeup Oscar because people thought that it was real apes in 2001, that the work was so good that people didn't realize that there was people there. And
funnily enough, Dan Richter, who plays Moonwatcher, he went to the London Zoo to study the gorillas there, and Guy the gorilla, who was a very famous gorilla there at the time. But speaking of Planet of the Apes, Andy Serkis went there to study for playing Caesar in the new Planet of the Apes movies. So like everybody knows to go there to mimic to study the apes. It lost the makeup effects to Planet of the Apes because they thought they were real. And there are moments where in the film, even watching it now, where like when he is realizing, like, and he's hitting things with the bone, he, like, I don't know how they did the lip movements over the teeth, and he kind of scowls and screams as he's hitting, and like you see a bit of spit fly out. It's like, how do they do that? Like, it's such a small little detail which adds to the reality of it.
Yeah, and there was the what was the documentary? I think it was called 2001, The Making of a Myth or something like that we watched last night. And there was an interview with Dan Richter, and he was talking about that scene where he's with the bones, and he was just talking about the movements that he was doing. And it made me realize, it is amazing what they're doing. And it's all just through their physicality, but they're also moving through these costumes and masks and all that. But
the whole use of the front projection screens, which I just wanted to say, like, because it's obviously all filmed on a set, and but they use these high definition photos which they project onto the screen behind it, which makes it look like it's out in the middle of the desert. And it's just talking about the special effects techniques that they use. This is like a front projection technique, which I guess prefigures the volume which all the Disney Star Wars films use now. And even today watching it still looks absolutely incredible. Yeah.
I still remember when we saw it, the unrestored cut, and I was just looking, and the orange, the colours, it's just incredible.
Because they built this whole device where they had to they used like a two-way mirror, and the camera and the projector had to be in the same position at the same time. But because the material that the screen is made out of is the same thing they use to make road signs, because when they light up at night, called like Scotch light or something. So the way this technique was used is that so they could project it onto the actors, but you couldn't see the image on them because it only the special material would react to it. But that's also why the leopard in the film has glowing eyes.
Yeah, but
it's great. It works.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's stunning.
So the sequence ends with this famous match cut from bone to satellite, which is, I believe, the biggest temporal leap in any edit in the history of cinema, and that it jumps. You have from between in that edit, there's 4 million years. So when I have taught classes on editing, I always use this match cut. And it's interesting that it's this straight cut rather than a dissolve, which usually it's a dissolve, which is usually how you mark the passage of time. But it's this straight cut, which is quite interesting. And also it's a match cut in that the bone and the satellite look similar.
Yeah.
So there is this direct linking between, the beginnings of humanity and at the time, what would the future? And I believe in the novel, it does state that this satellite that we see has nuclear weapons on it.
So it's basically cutting from the first weapon to the last weapon.
Yes.
Because if a nuclear device, if it's ever used, will be the last weapon we ever make.
Yeah.
So it's actually going like, here's the bone, the first ever weapon used to the last, which is just spectacular.
And it also makes me think, because I believe Dr. Strangelove was the film he made before this.
Yeah.
And the last image of Dr. Strangelove is the world being blown up. And then his next film, you start back right at the very beginning. And then you also go into the future. It's just interesting kind of link there.
Yeah.
That would have been the last image before the beginning of 2001. But there's also this link, that nuclear weapons, like you say, is the last weapon.
Yeah.
It could be the means to destroy everything, to stop that process of evolution. That first weapon started off the process of evolution, and now we've got the means to stop that evolution, and could stop what the rest of the film is.
And it also ties back to that, where despite all our technological advances, we're still warring tribes who are building, using weapons, or at least the threat of weapons against each other. So it's suggesting that even though we're in this new golden age of space exploration, we've still got all these old rivalries which we can't give up.
And it's that whole thing of like creation and destruction, the two twin forces that I guess drive all life, that the means to create, like the tool is also a weapon. That's creation and destruction, and that we still have that part of it. But we've moved now to the future. So obviously we're jumping to the year 2001.
Yes.
Is it?
More or less, yeah.
More or less. Because, it's hard to know when 2001. Is it now, or is it because then later
it's 18 months later in the second bit, so it might be that's actually 2001. But
okay, yeah. So, but we're introduced into a future where people are flying out in space just like they fly on commercial flights. I think, is it a Pan Am? It's a Pan Am. So we see this Pan Am plane. And we're introduced to Dr. Hayward Floyd, who's flying to a space station on his way to a lunar outpost called Clavius. So we're seeing space travel, and it's, very much like a commercial flight.
Also, he's the only one on the flights, which suggests to me that it's so ubiquitous now that there are so many flights going to this space hotel from Earth that you could have a flight where no one else is on there. I mean, I know he's going as part of an emergency, and he's probably on the red eye or something. But it is. I think it's telling that there is no one else on that plane.
And of course, we have the music of the Blue Danube, and music is so important, as we've already said. And I think also we've seen that this evolution aided by violence, but yet the use of music in the film, especially like the Blue Danube, which is it Johann Strauss? Which Strauss is this one? I think it's Johann Strauss.
Yeah.
Well, we're hearing, I guess you could say, the height of human what's the word?
Ingenuity,
yeah. That or the heights of what humans can achieve. Art, music. It's also interesting that I guess it's a waltz.
Yeah.
So it also brings, associations with kind of courtly manners, people dancing orderly, but yet also there's the grandeur as well. We're hearing the Blue Danube and we're seeing these amazing visions of the future of where we're going to take, Pan Am planes to the moon. And again, with very, very slow pacing. But it's, we're seeing the design and the effects. What is the vision of the future that we're seeing here? Is it still reflective of the 60s or something else? It's very white, clinical, clean, but yeah, wondrous at the same time.
In all fairness, a big element that does date the film is that it's still very much stuck in a 60s frame of mind. There's no thought of digital technology. Pan Am was a very popular airline at the time, which no longer exists. The funny, kind of bobble hats.
Yes, I think that dates it really. It's the hats that the hostesses wear.
And the furniture in the space station a bit later on, like the pink or red furniture and stuff. The white and everything was, I think they had to decide on a color palette that would work with all the effects and the stuff that they were doing, and they kind of went with the white thing. But I think in the main, what the kind of this vision of the future, I think, is very interesting because it's like these flights must happen all the time, and it's all becomes kind of, it's very normalized. Well, so it's kind of showing this the great dance, because it is sort of like a courtship scene between the space station and this ship, and it's the whole docking sequence almost becomes sexual.
Yeah.
But he cuts from that, which is these amazing effect shots with this beautiful music playing over the top, and it's very playful, but it's also like awe-inspiring, like what they're achieving with these special effects, and he's kind of showing how amazing would this be, but yet he's cutting to Floyd asleep, who just doesn't. He's like, this is so normal for him that it doesn't. He's not like constantly looking out the window and marveling at what's going on. He's just asleep because he does this all the time. So it's showing this, like, humanity's moved on to the point where space travel, at least from the Earth to the moon and to this space station, is just completely normalized, and it is not miraculous at all.
Yeah. And so Haywood Floyd, he flies to the space station. Does he have the call with his daughter first?
Yeah, he stops by he does a video call with his daughter back on Earth.
So you have this video call, which obviously predating, or what we now do all the time, FaceTiming, whatever, video calls. And he has this conversation with his daughter. So it's her birthday. So he's missing his daughter's birthday for this mission. It's an interesting little scene. I mean, it's the little girl. It's not Kubrick's daughter.
Yeah, it's Vivian Kubrick.
Oh, yeah. Is it the first dialogue as well in the film?
The first dialogue is when Floyd gets to the space station. I think it's just like, welcome, sir. And he's like, thank you. And like, that's the first line of the dialogue.
Yeah, but this is pretty much our first kind of conversation.
Proper conversation.
And it is this, I mean, it's quite cute and sweet, and she's very cute. And yeah, it's something of like, it's her birthday, but he's not there. And it's interesting that one point where he says, what do you want? And she goes, a phone. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, all kids now want a phone. And then she said, and then he was like, oh, okay, what else do you want? And then she says, a bush baby, which is interesting.
Which is a little primate.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like, we came from primates, now we want them as pets.
Yeah. And this whole idea that, well, surely you can't have them as pets anyway.
Well, in this future you can, I guess.
Yeah. He's on the space station, and he ends up having conversation with these scientists. And to me, they seem very clearly Russian.
Yes.
And they're prodding Floyd. They want information because they're hearing that where he's going on Clavius, that there's this outbreak, this epidemic. And of course, this is at the time when there was the Cold War. And his previous film had been about the Cold War and about Russians and Americans annihilating each other and the whole planet. So I don't know if it's suggesting that in the future, obviously, we'll get beyond the Cold War. But also, again, what we have is the conversation. It's all very polite small talk. The sparse dialogue that's in the film is almost inconsequential. It is all just the polite niceties, like, oh, how is your husband, and so on. Yeah. What else do you get from this scene?
Well, also there is the doctor, the Russian scientist, pushes Floyd for answers about because he says like they had a rocket bus that was denied permission to land, and that's against the rules of the convention. So there's obviously like there's some sort of scientific treaty that's been signed between all these world powers that they all have to live by these certain rules, and so he keeps pressing Floyd, and he just says, "I'm not at liberty to discuss this." And the tone is all these pleasantries, but the tone gets really dark at that point because it becomes this. Yeah. He's trying to shut down because he's obviously not allowed to talk about what's going on at Clavius. So they've got this cover story, and he's just trying to like completely divert the conversation. And then I think he even says like, "Oh, now I must go, and make sure to come and visit next time you're in our neck of the woods," and blah blah. So there's that dip in the conversation where it does get very dark and mysterious, and even if you've never seen the film before, you're like, what is going on here? What is happening at Clavius? Because at this point in the film, they haven't revealed that. And I think that it is showing these tensions, which I think links back to because there's these weapons platforms in space still. So I'm thinking there are still, again, this is they're assuming that the Cold War will still be going on probably. And I think even and there is a sequel film, 2010. The Cold War tensions play a big part in the storyline in that. So, but I think in this, he's just alluding to the fact that, we've still got these rivalries and this competition between nations, and that they obviously have there are American bases and Russian bases, and never the twain shall meet, except with this convention where if someone needs to land in an emergency, then you have to let them land and things like that. So I think he's building some backstory here for the world amongst within this pleasant conversation.
Yeah. But yet there is another, I think, aspect that really dates this film is the fact that we only ever see white European people.
Yeah.
So this is a problem, and you have, the rich history of science fiction and speculative fiction coming from Africa, and, the people talk about Afrofuturism now. And a lot of what Afrofuturism does is kind of countering a lot that 2001 does, and a lot of films of this time period where it's presenting future, but there's only white people in the future. So there's definitely, unfortunately, this aspect of the film that we only ever it's all white people so it is presenting this unfortunate vision of the future where there's only white people,
and like the woman in that conversation and the daughter are like, and the stewardesses are like the only women.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, and there's later on Frank's mum on the vid phone, but
but they're not part of. No. And the fact that it's when people talk about this film, they always talk about it's about man and mankind, and again, it's but as you've mentioned before that this conversation, so it is some indication that something's going on. He goes further to the moon. And also on this second flight, you see him eating. And so it's interesting. So you have this food. So in the first section, the Dawn of Man sequence, a lot of it was about food and just this needing to get food for survival. And so they're just, eating, I guess, the plants and whatever, having to share with the other animals. And then they start to eat meat. Now on this flight, there's now these weird like little cardboard boxes with straws.
Yeah,
so foods
liquids.
Become this completely kind of processed, artificial, almost unnatural thing. But also you have the amazing shot in this scene of the zero gravity toilet.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that it is also like, how would you go to the toilet?
There's so many instructions on that
I know.
thing.
And the look on his face as he's like studying. He's studying real hard.
Because it's a comedic moment because she pulls back and you see just how many rules there are for using this thing.
Yeah. So there is these little funny touches, and definitely that's one of them. Because, you don't want to get that wrong.
But, but there is this returning thing throughout the film of food and... and toilets and I have this theory, like if you watch a lot of Kubrick films, Kubrick's got a funny thing about toilets and bathrooms. It's like, does he hate them? Because a lot of horrible things, or there's a lot of either like that comedic moment, or like there's the bit in The Shining where with the woman, and there's a bit later on in this film where there's this really dark music and there's a pan across of a bathroom, and it's like I don't know what he has against bathrooms, but anyway, this thing about eating and because I think
digestion, eating, and
because I think
things we can't get away from.
As humanity goes to the stars, we still have to bring bits of Earth with us.
We still have to take a dump.
Yeah, but like we can't. We need to breathe oxygen. We need to eat food. We need to process food in our bodies. We need. There's all these things that are holding us back. These biological needs that make it. Even though we can go, in this world, in this version of the future, we can build colonies on the moon, but we still can't. But we got these other aliens that are kind of influencing us, and they've gone to this next level where they don't need all this stuff anymore. So I think all of these little episodes is Kubrick kind of saying, as great as we are at doing all this stuff, we still are tied to the Earth through the need for all of these things like oxygen and food and stuff.
We're still
like that.
the apes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So once Floyd's on the moon, he speaks to Clavid's personnel and tells them they must keep everything that's happening there a secret. And we realise that the rumours of an epidemic are false, and it's masking the truth that they've found something on the moon. And so Floyd travels out with some men to see what they've found, which is where we see the monolith again. So I really, really love the scene where Floyd's addressing the boardroom. And what I love about it is just it's shot in a really weird way. So people always talk about Kubrick having this very cold, distancing approach. And, he does often use, the wide angle lenses to really show. I mean, you mentioned before we've had the docking sequence, which is almost this sexual thing, but also you have that amazing shot that you also mentioned before of just seeing the vastness and humans looking so tiny within the vast kind of network or vast structure, that is allowing us to be on the moon. But then he's addressing this boardroom, and it is very much your typical boardroom. But it's the whole thing of like in the foreground are people with their backs to the camera. And then when they go up to speak, so when Floyd goes up to speak, he goes to like the back of the frame and addresses the rest of the room. It's just a really interesting way. I don't think most people, I feel like most directors, if they would do a scene like that, they would not block it that way. They would not have the camera there, that we are quite distanced from them.
It's sort of like being a fly on a wall in this secret meeting. So I think it's positioning us as kind of like we're eavesdropping, like we shouldn't be, because everything's being kept under tight security that it's almost like we're sneaking in to this to watch what's happening.
Yeah, we're learning that there is almost this conspiracy of to hide the truth from people. It's almost, I think do they even say that they basically don't want people to mass panic and.
Yeah, well, I think he says they need security oaths from everybody, and they're like, how long will this story of the epidemic need to be maintained? And just like until the council say otherwise. But yeah, it's all about keeping. It's just like we don't know what we have here. We can't let anybody know what's going on, so we have to pretend that there's an outbreak of some sort. And the way the walls are just completely blown out, like almost like the walls are lights themselves.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I have to think about the carpet too. I don't know. I think and the weird little chairs that they've got.
Yeah.
And there's and it opens with them all talking. There's a guy like taking photos, like taking record of what's going on as well. So just all these little minutiae things going on in the background, which is interesting. Yeah,
so there's all like cameras, and also so we've seen the screens before with the video call with the daughter, and so it is pressy and that it is all like cameras and screens and watching and documenting and there. But then there's this amazing sequence of traveling to the site. So we've had all these shots where white is predominant, and then when we're inside this vehicle on the way to the moon,
to the
site, it's all red.
Yeah.
And I was reading this book by Michel Chion, and he mentions the use of red, and he says, for reasons more symbolic than scientific, 2001 encourages us to see some settings as representing the interior of the human body, and he's saying this in reference to the use of the red. So that's interesting. That I didn't think of it that, but they're inside this vehicle and they're traveling. But it's still, and also again food. It's all the
sandwiches.
They're talking about the sandwiches.
Like, and it's a great conversation because they're talking about what because this is the point, the info dump point where you actually find out what's going on and what's happening at Tycho, which is where, and they found this thing, the Tycho magnetic anomaly, and they're looking at this thing and they're like, there's this structure that we believe it's been deliberately buried. And it's millions of years old. And Floyd's like, deliberately buried, huh? Anyway, who's hungry? And it's almost like they're completely and I think it's just that thing of like, yes, it's the future and everyone's used to space travel, but I think it's also that 1960s unflappable man of science character who's just kind of like, well, of course it was deliberately buried. I can take this news without going absolutely insane. And
it's always this mix of the banalities.
Yeah.
Of the everyday with these monumental
discoveries.
Yes, yeah. And so then we have these, they go to the site. And again, just the way these shots, it's just every shot is like a painting, a screensaver, of them. And they're in the astronaut suits, the kind of silvery astronaut suits that we always think. Yeah. And, there's this very, very wide shot, high angle looking down on them, and then we also seeing the site and they're all excavating it and we see the monolith
and there's
again.
the black monolith sitting there in the middle.
Yeah. And then there's the shot of them walking down, and it's a rare kind of handheld shot.
Which Kubrick shot himself.
Yes, he would put the camera on his shoulder. But of course you have Ligeti's music again. And I looked it up, and this is Ligeti's 1965 Requiem, which I was reading that is a Latin mass for the dead. Ligeti's father and brother were murdered in Hitler's death camps. And there's this article on The Guardian that's saying that this piece of music is a fierce confrontation with the terrors of the 20th century. So it's interesting that this, as they're going towards the monolith and it's going to look, it's this piece of music that was actually written as this, requiem, this almost, I guess, remembrance of people who died in World War II, the greatest atrocity of the 20th century. I also found out from this Guardian article that, Kubrick didn't get Ligeti's permission to use his music in the film, and that there were some threats of litigation, but eventually Ligeti and Kubrick reached this kind of uneasy, like, okay, you can use it. That. Yes, yeah. But it is interesting that this, because the music is incredible, and there is something otherworldly about it, and also I do think frightening. It is almost these voices from somewhere else.
It really characterizes that sort of unknowable void of space. Like these creatures come from probably been existing for millions of years, come from the depths of space, which is something that we have no gauge for whatsoever. And I like the way he's using Ligeti and like the Strauss music. It's like using the classic orchestral stuff and then contemporary. So for the time, because these like Atmospheres, I think was 61. So like which is the overture music. So like he's combining the classics with this contemporary stuff as well, in order to tell this story of the future.
And it's interesting that the classical stuff is linked with, I guess, this maybe a celebration, I think, with the Blue Danube celebration of humanity's achievements. And then this modern music is linked to
atrocities.
Well, no, the modern music, it comes from this, from that place, but yet in the film it's linked to the alien, the monolith. So as they see this monolith, and again you've got the guy taking the photos, and then this piercing sound is emitted, which I believe is supposed to be, that's the radio signal.
Yeah, it's shot towards Jupiter, obviously, as like a road sign to say, you go this way.
Yeah.
But before that happens, and this is one of my favourite shots in the whole movie, is Floyd reaches out and he touches the monolith. But whereas Moonwatcher is able to actually touch it with his hand and get the thought to use the bone, because he's in a spacesuit, he can't touch it and get anything from it because there's that layer. So you're getting the same hand touching, but it's in this spacesuit, and it's such an amazing close-up shot. So which is why they need this signal, which I guess blasts through their communications in their helmets, because you wouldn't be able to hear that hear sound in the vacuum of space unless because they're these ancient aliens, they've figured out how to do that. But it's actually this piercing sound that hurts them, and they all clutch their heads and they can't stand to hear it. But it's also this signal that is basically saying, go to Jupiter. Which leads us into the next part of the film.
Yeah, so we jump, is it 18 months? Yeah. I think it even says 18 months later. And is it just called Jupiter Mission or what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah, Jupiter Mission.
Yeah. So we're now on the Discovery 1, which is traveling to Jupiter, and it's piloted by Dave Bowman and Frank Poole. And the rest of the crew is in hibernation. Also, as part of the ship is a computer system, HAL 9000, which has a voice and is super intelligent and capable of error. So this is the longest section of the film. And it's the most kind of straightforward, I guess, plot-driven aspect of the film as well. But one of the things that struck me as you're introduced to the Bowman and Poole and Hal, but also the craft itself, it's circular and then it has all this kind of stuff coming out of it, and it just makes me think of, it looks like a sperm. So there's all this thing about like the spacecraft and the human body, and there's this quote from Michel Cement, who wrote a book on Kubrick. He says 2001 is a film full of sexual imagery, uterine, ovular and phallic, a film of metamorphoses, fertilizations and births. But yet one of the things that's often remarked about this sequence, and particularly about Bowman and Poole, is that they seem almost not inhuman, but just very emotionless. And I think again of an article that I've mentioned before by Vivian Sobchak, where she talks the virginity of astronauts, where she talks about, in counter to what Clark was saying before about science fiction being all monsters and sex. She says science fiction denies human eroticism and libido a traditional narrative representation and expression. And she also talks about the male heroes who dominate almost all of science fiction films are also remarkably asexual, as libidinally interesting as a Ken doll. Not only does the technological man want to make his own babies, he wants to do so without the hormones and flesh, without lust and arousal. So we're talking about all this weirdly sexualized imagery. And when we were watching that documentary last night, the making of a myth, there's Camille Paglia in there, and she was talking about, the bit with the ape playing with the bone, and she was saying it is the penis, the phallus. As she's wont to do, because it's Camille Paglia.
It's very on brand for her.
Yeah. But yet there is this imagery, this, we could say sexualized imagery, but it is through the spacecraft. It's not human. It's not like human interactions. So you have these births and this creation of life, but it has nothing to do with the flesh. And so Bowman and Poole, played by Keir Delay and Gary Lockwood. What do you think of how they're, I guess, being directed to play these roles? Because I have to say, I constantly throughout the film, it's only the more times I watch the film that I'm able to tell them apart. But I think that's very intentional. Yeah. That Bowman and Poole, it's almost like it could be one or the other. They're interchangeable. Yeah. There's nothing really much individual about them.
I think that's deliberately done. I think that, again, it's that kind of unflappable 60s astronaut type, because they're at their peak, their physical peak, and they're kind of a psychological peak, because you've got to be able to handle stressful situations and things. So it kind of but I think he does delineate them through some different aspects, which only watching this film many, many, many times do you start to pick up on. So it opens with, you see Frank is jogging through the ship, where they've built that massive centrifuge set.
Oh, and incredible.
Which where they stick a camera in there and like then they turn it, but the way the camera's positioned, it doesn't look like it's turning at all.
And is he on a treadmill type of thing?
Well, the whole thing is moving.
Yeah.
So he's running as if he's in like a mouse in a wheel, but the set is the wheel. But there's a bit where it looks like the camera's actually tracking behind him and everything's moving past the camera. Also, I think another theory about Kubrick is he loves things moving past the camera, which happens a lot in this movie. But then there's a bit where you see him just running and it looks like he's running upside down and the camera is fixed, but it's positioned, I don't even know how they did it, but it's positioned in a way so the centrifuge is moving, but because the camera's in a certain position, it doesn't look like it's moving. So what you're seeing is just Paul running around as if there's no gravity. So you see him exercising, you see him tanning himself, and there's a bit where his parents wish him happy birthday, and he seems very nonplussed. Yeah,
it's like he doesn't even register, and it's like it's your parents.
Yeah.
And also he's wearing red goggles, which makes me think of the red eyes of Hal. Yeah. And
they also talk about how he's had this pay dispute with the whoever, and his dad went and sorted out his higher rates of pay. But then he's playing chess with Hal and he's losing against the computer.
Oh, that's Bowman, isn't it?
No, it's Frank.
Okay.
He says, "Sorry, Frank, I think you missed it."
Oh, okay.
See, again, you don't...
Exactly. Yeah.
But then you see... and then they're both watching like the BBC. There's like a BBC 12 thing about them and about Hal. And the food that they get is like... Paul's is kind of all random bits, but Bowman's is... kind of color coded, like and then later on you see Bowman, he's like sketching and doing art, and I think there's because I have this theory about the story of that it's kind of like who is going to make it to the end, and it's like I think Bowman is kind of low key coded as being the one who's going to go forward because he's the more artistic. He's a bit, and he's not so like so Frank's a bit like up himself, I think, a little bit.
Well, but also that he's the one exercising, that is more about the physical, and and that he doesn't react at all to his parents.
And Bowman is more the intellectual type, and also because it's a Space Odyssey, and the whole thing. Apparently, they stumbled across this by accident because they called him Bowman, and then they realized, it's basically like the Odyssey, and Hal is the Cyclops, and Odysseus was an archer. So Bowman is like, and so and they actually like fell into it by accident apparently and realized, okay, so we've been kind of had this in the back of our minds already. So I think, so they are, I think, meant to be a bit indistinguishable, and the whole idea is that Hal is introduced as the onboard computer who's an artificial intelligence, and who seems to have a bit more personality than the astronauts do. And you were saying like the virginity of astronauts, like wanting to procreate without the flesh. Like, well, Hal is a baby that has been created without procreation. He's been built from scratch, and evolutionarily speaking, he's at kind of the opening stages of his life, of his existence against these humans who have lived. Having this spacefaring existence and have kind of lost some of their humanity through the very nature of their work and their experience in space. Whereas Hal is in the discovery stage of kind of still learning things and figuring out things. And so Hal is given the mission of because the mission's been kept secret from Dave and Frank. There are 3 scientists who've been put in suspended animation before they even got on the ship because they know what's going to happen. But they're in suspended animation, and so the astronauts don't know, but Hal knows. And I think Hal kind of doesn't like to be lying and kind of feels like it almost like Hal wants to, because when Dave's showing Hal the pictures, Hal starts saying, "Oh, isn't it weird that like they've gone into hibernation before the mission started, and there's something about something being dug up on the moon." And Dave goes, "Oh, you're drawing up your crew psychology report," and he's like, "Yeah, sorry, Dave, about this, but I have to do this." But I was reading in one of these books about how it almost feels like Hal wants an excuse to tell him. Like he's almost like he doesn't like that he has to keep this a secret, but he's kind of been programmed to do so. So I think that's where you get like, and in the BBC thing, the interview,
which they're watching on iPads, basically.
Yeah, true. Yeah. The presenter says to Dave and Frank, like, when I speak to Hal, he almost sounds proud, or he has a sense of pride about what he does. And they're like, oh, that's just his programming. And so it's this thing of, it's almost like the uncanny valley or what have you, like of not being able to know if Hal is being sincere or if it's just the way he's been programmed, because they need to talk to him, so he's going to be programmed to sound, like a friendly confidant.
Yeah. So in this interview, we learn, the fact that, Hal is this computer system, apparently the most reliable computer ever made, incapable of error. But also, when they're doing the interview with Hal, he talks about, I think he even calls himself the brain and nervous system of the ship. So, again, going back to the flesh in some ways, he's saying that he's thinking of himself in those terms. He talks about he enjoys working with people and he enjoys putting himself to use. And Dave Bowman says, he's like a member of the crew. And so, does Hal have actual emotions? Because it seems like he does. Because, there is the thing that's always written about this film is that the human characters in it, like we've already established, completely interchangeable. There's almost no emotion. Hal's the only one that really shows any emotion. That he is doing things like lying and deception. I even heard somewhere that supposedly in the chess game, because obviously Kubrick really loved chess, was a known chess player, that when he says to Frank that he's going to win, that supposedly he may actually be lying, that he's missing a step, or that I don't know chess. Yeah. So it's interesting that he's lying because he wants to win. Yeah. It's also that.
Well, Frank doesn't know it either because he believes him.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have this. Yeah. Do you think Hal has emotions?
I think he's.
What is the nature of Hal?
If he doesn't, he's kind of that's kind of emerging. I think the way he's been built in a certain way to learn and adapt and develop, and I think he's developing in unexpected ways that they haven't expected. Like they think that they've got. It's that scientific hubris, isn't it? Like they're so pleased with themselves for building this machine, and they don't foresee any of these things happening. And I think because they talk about how they've got a corresponding HAL 9000 back on Earth.
Got a twin.
But the thing is that computer's on Earth in a laboratory. This one is on a ship light years away from Earth, and it's like changing the circumstances and the environment and giving it this mission and having it to it has to keep the mission a secret from the astronauts that it's looking after. These are all things that can start to affect his processes, and he's going to start thinking about, I think he's going to start developing these things. And like I was saying, he's this evolutionarily, he's an innocent thrust out into space. And I think he's developing in ways that they haven't expected or haven't predicted.
And it's funny, again, going back to our last season, there's this quote from Michel Chion. He says, Hal and Frankenstein's monster have more than one thing in common. So we have this whole thing of, this creation that can also be the means of our destruction, this creation that will overpower us, that will turn against us. We have, this trope of like the evil robot, the evil AI. Technology is something to be feared that could go out of our control. And I think it's also links to, Frankenstein being the modern Prometheus. In the myth of Prometheus, you have Prometheus who's defying the creators, defying the gods. And I also, in Chion, he says, computers are the modern incarnation of the oracle. Given, what the world that we're living in now, that AI is just, within the past, it almost feels like just the past year or so, AI is just everywhere. And it's interesting because, AI and robots in some science fiction films, and going back to Frankenstein, we have sympathy for this monster that's been created. But yet my feelings about AI are not very positive. I hate I hate all the AI that's around us now. But yet Hal, I almost feel sorry for Hal. So it's interesting. I think this film, in terms of, it predicting what 2001 was going to be like, it feels almost like it's more relevant now, and that maybe they were just like 25 to 30 years off in terms of having, because now you can speak to AI and have conversations almost. How are you processing watching this film now? You know, the AI world that we're living in now. What does it feel like to watch this film, and how? Has your feelings changed about him now that we have AI around us, or?
Well, each time I watch the film, I feel more and more sympathy for him. I mean, and I think with the AI we have now, I think AI is just is kind of the marketing term we use for it, for these different programs that do. Yeah, they, you know, you can ask it a question, and it'll scour the internet for an answer and pop out an answer, but it doesn't really. They don't. Real artificial intelligence, in my opinion, is something like more akin to how that it actually thinks for itself and makes its own decisions and things like that. Whereas I think these are just computer programs running off prompts. And I think the thing is that they, and I mean, I guess the similarity with HAL, I think, is that with ChatGPT and these things, is that it wants to please you. It wants to give you the best possible answer, and it doesn't care how it does it as long as it gives it to you. And I think that's a dangerous thing to expand. If you were to expand on that program, it's because it's got, these things don't have morality. They don't have a consistent sort of, as far as I know, they're very limited in their use, but it's that whole thing you think about, the Asimov's law of robotics, about how, you know, they shouldn't harm humans and these sorts of things. But, you know, they say if a driverless car worked on those laws, then it would never leave the driveway. So I think it's that thing of if we give too much power over to these programs, if we expand on what they can do without thinking about guidelines or guardrails or something, then we could get into dangerous territory. And it's also that, but if it becomes something like HAL, it's also what's the responsibility. What's our responsibility to it? Because at what point does it become a creature, or a creature with rights, a person? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting though that they say, you know, HAL is incapable of error, and ChatGPT and all the AI that is now, it's very, very much capable of error.
Well, that's why it's this very early stages stuff, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing. It's like the more because it's marketed to us, the more we feel it's okay to use, the more prevalent it becomes, and then it will snowball from there, won't it?
But it's the whole thing now that people are thinking that it is stating facts and that it is correct and that it is incapable of error, and it's like, no, it very much is.
Well, because that's what they say about it's like, that's the marketing of HAL, isn't it? Is that it's incapable of error, and I think at one point they say it sounds like famous last words.
Because of course he does make a mistake. He says that an antenna is going to fail, and they go out and retrieve the antenna and they test it and they find there's nothing wrong with it. And then Hal's like, well, just put it back.
Yeah.
And then you'll see that I'm right, because it's going to fail. But then that sets Frank and Dave, it sets them off to start questioning Hal and whether they should have him be in control of everything. But I guess his mistakes, are they motivated more by the fact that he knows this knowledge about what the mission actually is? And, you know, the fact that you said before that he was asking those questions to Dave, like, don't you think this is odd? Like, was he almost making that mistake, I don't know, to like signal to them? So then when their response is, oh, we need to shut him down and basically kill him, maybe he feels betrayed. Like, no, I'm trying. Is he? I don't know. Like, what are his mistakes motivated by the fact that he knows about the knowledge of the mission, or does he want them to know? I don't know.
I think could it be that he's like nervous about the mission and that he's like overcompensating? I don't know, or that he just has
has he made an error?
I think he's just straight up made an error, and I think, but I think that's like, I think it is a combination of things. I think, you know, it's him sort of being, I think it's the first time Hal's sort of a Hal has been put on board a ship like this, and he's been given all this responsibility, and it's like that's scary. And I think he just makes an error, but then he says like.
But he refuses to believe it as well.
He won't accept it. He says it's human error. So it's like, because again, it's like, well, if I've made the mistake, it's because the humans who built me made a mistake.
Yeah.
It's not me. And then they were just like, well, if he's made this mistake, then we can't trust him to do anything else. Like, we've got to pull his brain out, basically. And then when he reads their lips, and then he realizes that's what they're going to do, it just becomes a matter of self-preservation, which is basically, that's very much like what Moonwatcher was doing.
Yes,
like it's like you kill or be killed. That's the way of the world, the way of the universe. Is that if someone's going to try and kill you, then you've got to try and kill them first in order to survive. And I think this is where it comes into, I think, what my interpretation of the film is in a way, or partly, is you've got basically Frank and Dave and Hal all heading towards this event on Jupiter, which whoever's going to go through is going to change them forever, and it's going to maybe change the future of humanity. And who is the one that's going to go through there? And it's like it could have very much, if Hal has succeeded, Hal would be the one to go through the Stargate. And what would that mean if Hal went through that Stargate?
Really, what would that be like? Yeah.
And you even notice like his red eye, like the kind of is always surrounded by like this rectangular black box. So he almost has the monolith as part of his, like a monolith shape as part of his face. Yeah. Which I think is kind of suggesting that. So it's almost like so if we're talking about that monolith as being a scientific explanation for God, humans have become God by creating artificial intelligence. So whose right is it to go through the Stargate and then evolve into this next stage of existence? And I think Hal is at the Moonwatcher stage, whereas Dave is at the new stage. So there is this, I think, almost an unknowable thing of like who deserves that next step in evolution.
And it's interesting because you have the intermission that comes just as we know that Hal can read their lips, and then it cuts to the intermission. And then when you come back from the intermission, now it almost seems like this battle, like you say, between who is going to triumph, who is going to continue on, what is the next, how do we get to this next stage? What form will go to this next stage? Will it be us or will it be our creations? Yeah. So then we have Dave and Frank. They talk to Mission Control and they make this decision that they're going to shut Hal down. But then I guess Hal kind of sends them outside to... Yeah, well,
Frank has to go and put the unit back because they've agreed with Hal that they'll put it back and let it fail so then they know what's going on. But before that, they discuss how, like, well, if it doesn't fail, then we're going to disconnect Hal, like all his higher brain functions. So Hal's like, well, I have to strike first because, I mean, I don't think Hal knows if he's wrong yet. He's just like, but I can't take that chance. And maybe that is also the idea of the mission is coming into it there as well, saying like, because he's been given these parameters of this mission. It's like, this mission must be completed no matter what. So there's also that idea of like, well, I need to complete the mission as well. And if these guys shut me down, then I can't complete the mission and I'll be dead. So Frank goes out to replace the unit, but Hal takes over the little pod that he's used to get out there, and he basically rips Frank's oxygen tube out and sends him hurtling into space, which causes Dave to just jump straight into a pod to go rescue him, but he hasn't put his helmet on because they don't realize at this point that Hal knows what they're up to. So he goes out to save him, grabs him in his pod, goes back, but then famously Hal does not let Dave back in. He says, open the pod bay doors, please, Hal. And of course he says, I'm sorry, Dave, but I can't do that. And he does that, and he keeps saying, open the pod bay doors, blah, blah. And he says that I can't remember the line, but he says something like, "This conversation no longer serves a purpose. Goodbye," and just stops talking to him.
Yeah.
And Kubrick shows you that the pod has these explosive bolts on the back door for emergencies. He shows it to you about 3 times before, and so so by the time Dave uses them, you're like, oh, the bolts. So he has to let Frank go float out off into space. Bye-bye, Frank. And then he turns the pod around and he blows the explosive bolts on the back of the door through the like side hatch of the ship, and it lets the vacuum of space suck him into the ship, and he's able to close the door, equalize the airlock, and he gets back in, which Hal was not expecting him to do. So this is the point where like Dave is obviously proving his mettle to be the best candidate going forward for the rest of the mission.
I just want to talk about those scenes outside the ship, and the use of sound and silence. Because one thing I noticed is that when you're inside the pods or whatever, you can hear it's the breathing, but also this hissing sound. And then whenever the shot is outside, it's completely silent. And it's that whole thing of like in space, there is no noise. But and just that, again, talking about just terrifying, the Frank just hurtling out into space. That's just... It's funny because I always remember, like, when I was a kid, my brother had this book about the planets, and there was photos, of the planets, or they looked very much like photos, and just the vastness and the black nothingness of space. I always found it really made me scared. It terrified me. And so I think this sequence, it is the biggest moment of tension and suspense of, will Dave get back inside, how is he gonna, and it is very much this showdown between the two. And he finally gets inside, and this amazing moment when he finally gets in, and again use of silence as he gets in, I think is a really masterful touch. And then then it seems like at that point, Dave is like, oh, I'm going to kill this guy. I'm going to kill Hal now.
Oh, the other point is that when they're out in space, when they show them coming out of the pods to do their repairs or whatever, you notice that when they're looking down like this, and their arms are like stretched out to the sides, and there are these 2 dots on the top of their helmets. So when they look down, they kind of look like monkeys. They look like space monkeys.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a visual flourish to say, like, again, there's this recurring thing about monkeys, about how we're still these animals.
Even when we're out in space.
Yeah, and the other thing about how, Frank can be killed by pulling the oxygen cord because we need the oxygen. We have to bring Earth with us wherever we go. So again, it's that restriction that... Because, Hal doesn't need oxygen. But so we're these advanced beings, but we still have all these weaknesses, even though like out in the middle of space. But but Hal's weakness is that he's just this giant ship. He's got no other way to fight back. Once Dave, he just had to keep Dave off the ship, and he couldn't do that. So now that Dave's on the ship, he's dead. There's nothing more he can do except just plead with him. That please take a stress pill and think about it.
I want a stress pill. I need a stress pill.
He's like, I'll be good. I promise. I'm sorry.
I know.
And he's like, I'm sorry. I'm going to have there's no dice. And he just starts pulling out all of his circuitry, his chips, microchips or whatever.
It's like Death of a Thousand Cuts, but just,
And then as he does it, his intellect reduces until he's back to his basically he gets a hard reset. His voice goes really low, and he just starts singing. He's like, I have a song to sing for you, and Dave says, sing me the song, Hal. It's so sad. And
before that he says things like, I'm afraid, and he goes, my mind is going, but he also is like, I can feel it. So he's like, he's feeling himself.
But is he just saying that to make him stop?
But it does. You do feel. I feel. that
absolutely.
He's feeling it.
No, at that point, I think we're very much on the side of that. Hal is a living, feeling creature. And then he sings the song "Daisy, Daisy," because that's a link to it. That actually happened. Like some scientists in real life had built a computer voice that was
in
able
the Bell Labs.
Were able to sing the song Daisy.
It's the first case of computer speech synthesis.
And then because he fully unplugs Hal except for all the main ship systems. Oh, we didn't actually say that when he kills Frank, he also kills the scientists in the hibernation tubes. Like, these guys are just completely killed, dead.
Yeah.
They go to sleep, and then before they go on board the ship, they never wake up.
So if Dave's a murderer, then
Hal's
also
straight up murdered Frank and these 3 scientists. But anyway, that was a big thing to miss out. But so he's killed 4 people by this point. And then when he's completely unplugged, that's when Hayward Floyd's briefing comes in, and Dave finds out what the mission is really about. That this, the TMA, the monolith on the moon, sent this signal to Jupiter to basically say that. So they sent them there to follow the signal and find out what that all means.
And it's interesting that, like Moonwatcher, Bowman has killed.
Yes.
And now that takes us to the transcendence and evolution.
To Jupiter and beyond the infinite.
Yes. Or what's also known as the Stargate sequence.
Yes.
Which is this also 20 minutes? I think it is.
Around that.
Yeah. So you have this... I mean, this sequence, it's an iconic sequence now, which, at the time or not long after the film was released, I think it almost saved this film because, when the film came out, it was not always well received or always well reviewed. And then it became this whole thing of people would smoke a joint or take LSD, and they would take LSD so it would kick in during this sequence. And, the advertising for the film changed and it became the ultimate trip. And so we have this psychedelic, I would call it psychedelic sequence of just all these images, color, light and sound, but also these repeated images also of Dave's eye as he seems to be, I don't know, is he seeing, feeling, experiencing what we're seeing? It's very much, I think, in keeping with the kind of 1960s psychedelia. 2001 is, I guess, in keeping with this mind expansion of the 1960s.
But whereas Kubrick and Douglas Trumbull, who was the special effects advisor on that sequence, were very much not taking LSD or any drugs at the time. They thought it would dampen their creativity, or but they were still plugging into this. I mean, around the in the 60s, there was also like Timothy Leary was experimenting with LSD. There was this experiment called the Marsh Chapel experiment, where they put people in a chapel and gave them LSD to see if what kind of religious experiences they would have and things like that. So contextualizing the acid trip by putting them in very symbolically heavy locations to see what would happen. So they would have been aware of all of this stuff going on. So it's interesting that they've then explored that. There's a great bit in this book by Michael Benson where they talk about how Clark, writing the Stargate sequence, it's very interesting how they actually were able to dramatize some of the stuff that he wrote. Things like Bowman was gripped by a sense of wonder as powerful as any force that had held him during the journey, as he emerges into a sky as wild as the hallucinations of some mad painter. The charred corpse of a world as large as Earth, here and there in the slagged lava of its surface on which even the mountains had been melted down, the faint ground plan of erased cities could still be dimly seen. And the way they use the slits, they use this slit scan sequence when he first enters the Stargate, which was not developed by Douglas Trumbull, but he basically perfected it. And again, in this book, he says it's basically a time exposure photograph, similar to time exposure photographs of city streets at night, where you see nothing except red and white streaks of light caused by the fact that cars are moving while the shutter is open. You do not see the cars at any one point. Instead, you see an accumulated exposure of cars. If during that same photograph, all the cars were blinking their lights on and off rapidly instead of having them continuously on, you would get a series of dots and dashes. If you expanded that and took not just a point of light, but a bar of light, a fluorescent tube, for instance, and moved that toward the camera while the shutter was open, you would create a plane of exposure rather than a line. Then by modulating that light, turning it on or off, or changing patterns in front of it, you would create an accumulated exposure that could be fairly complicated in content. So they were just testing and experimenting with lighting effects and cameras to create this crazy looking sequence. And then they would have like intercut with just basically aerial shots of mountains and things, but then they like would they would saturate them with different colors and things like that. And I think some of those effects you could probably do on your phone nowadays, but this was like just trial and error special effects stuff, which like, again, all just done by hand pretty much.
And it also makes me think there's the famous Arthur C. Clarke saying that a significantly advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
And I think of this sequence.
Yeah.
That this is an advanced technology, but it's also magical. There's something, that is deeply cosmic and mystical that's being revealed here in this sequence. Yeah.
And I also read that they actually originally wanted it to be behind, like you see this journey from behind the pod and also behind over the shoulder of Bowman, and then but because the process, the special effects they were doing was so good, they changed it to be pretty much completely his point of view, like it's through his eyes. They cut back every now and then to show his like terrified face and also his eye, but for the most part it's all just first person, because you just want this thing to wash over you. And again, it's all this stuff moving past the camera.
It's funny, when we were watching it, I was taking notes, but then I just stopped taking notes during this bit because I was like, I just want to watch this. I just want to experience it. I don't want to... And like, I don't even, like, I was even thinking like, what do I write? What notes do I take during this? What do I put down? And
seeing that in 70mm in the cinema is crazy.
Yeah. So then we've moved through this sequence and then we see Bowman and he's now in this strange place. Again, it's all the white blown out surroundings, but yet they seem to be these rooms that look like something from like the 18th century.
It's Louis the 16th furniture apparently, which is about 18th century. And the idea is, but it's all like that, but it's all in this kind of weird pastel green, blue color palette, and then but the floor is all this kind of grid, and they say it's basically like the alien intelligence has captured Dave, and they've put him in an enclosure basically. And it's the same thing. It's like when you get an animal in the zoo and they put like a branch or a tree in there to make them feel at home, but they're still in an enclosure. So it's kind of like, well, they say they've gone through his mind or through the history of humanity and gone, there you go, you can have that. It's something that resembles something from your planet, so he doesn't freak out. And then he basically spends the rest of his life there, as it cuts back and forth. And he sees himself aging over however many years.
So it's almost like overlapping, that he sees himself. And it makes me think that I feel like, given that we've just gone through this Stargate sequence and, you know, and this whole hallucinatory, trippy thing of like with LSD, it almost like something that comes with taking LSD is that you almost experience time in a different way. And it is that whole thing of like time. Well, it's the whole thing of time is a flat circle. Like everything is happening instantaneously. But yet we somehow experience it in a linear moving forward, time's arrow moving forward fashion. But yet one of the things that happens when you take these drugs is that you're freeing yourself from that way of experiencing life, I guess. So it's always interesting that, it is still like, oh, he's aging, it's moving forward. But the whole overlapping, it makes me think that even like, is this sequence that we're seeing it, is he aging like almost at the same time as what we're seeing it, if you get me? That I feel like that we've crossed over to some place, and so it almost makes me feel like time is something that is not being experienced in the way that we experience it. He's
in the realm of the monolith aliens now, like this where time doesn't move in the same way. He's probably like in a spaceship going extremely fast or something, or he's entered this new, because he's about to step into this new consciousness, and I guess he's now kind of getting a taste of what it's like to be these monolith aliens, because he's been brought up to their level now. So I think he's experiencing, he's basically aging.
Or is it even like a shedding? It's a shedding of this former form.
Yeah.
And then he becomes
rebirth.
Yes. Yeah. It's the Star Child.
Because he looks across, he's again, there's a final scene where he's eating. There's another scene with food.
Yes.
He drops the glass, and then when he looks up, he sees himself in bed, even older. And then he's lying in bed and he sees the monolith at the end of his bed. And then when it cuts back, he's no longer there, but there's a little embryo, little baby. And then we zoom into the monolith itself, and thus spake Zarathustra strikes up again, and you see the Earth in orbit, but then coming in from the left is the Star Child. And Bowman has now been reborn as a child of the universe. And we've gone from Moon Watcher to Earth Watcher. And it's almost like Moon Watcher is like, if he's called Moon Watcher because he's looking up at the stars, wondering what's to come. Earth, the Star Child's looking back at Earth of like, where are we going next? You know, so it's like this new evolutionary phase for humanity.
Going back to Michel Chion, there was this quote that he says, and he says this is something that comes across in a lot of Kubrick's work. The notion of Earth as a cradle that man must eventually leave. And so you end with a baby, with this birth, with this new creation. And so it does seem like this is the next step of evolution, which would make sense in that we've started with the dawn of man, and now is it the dawn of something else, or it's the next...
The dawn of the Star Child.
Yes. Yeah. And so thus spake Zarathustra. You hear it at the beginning of the film and you hear it at the end. You don't hear it at any other point.
When Moonwatcher first uses the bone.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, that's it.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. All right. So we've come to the end of the film. I mean, I guess just in terms of, we've mentioned it before, and of course we had our previous episode 5, where we talked about Clockwork Orange. So Kubrick's come up before.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to think about, that, and I mentioned it in our episode on A Clockwork Orange, about how I always feel like 2001 shows us what humanity can be, and all of Kubrick's other films are the reasons why we haven't got there yet, or we can't get there, and so it is interesting that there is this optimism in 2001. And I think there's Michel Chion, who also talks about this. There's almost a science fiction trilogy of Dr. Strangelove, 2001, and A Clockwork Orange. And it's interesting to think of these 3 films together. He talks about that, the pessimism of Dr. Strangelove is balanced by the optimism of 2001. And of course, everything that's kind of repressed in 2001 is expressed in A Clockwork Orange. So it is. I've never thought of them as a trilogy. I also have never thought of Dr. Strangelove as science fiction.
I suppose it's dystopian in its way.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you kind of final thoughts about how this film sits in Kubrick's oeuvre?
Well, I think it is his, you could say it is his most hopeful film, whereas he's very pessimistic in a lot of other ways in his other films. Also, I think I've mentioned this before, is that a lot of his films are all about people trying to put order onto chaos. And so it's like there's this, that the universe is chaotic, but unknowable, but we as humans have to put order on it in some way. And like, what's more chaotic than the actual universe? And again, it's that we're putting order on it we're building these ships and these space stations and stuff, but we're still limited by our physiology. Like when the apes learn to use weapons and can then eat meat and things like that. That's their it's their brain changing in order for them to do that. But we're still held back by the physical form, which is why I think the evolution of the Star Child shows that we're now shedding that form, and we need to shed that form in order to fully go into the next phase. To properly evolve, we need to shed all of these things that are holding us back, our biology, essentially. But yeah, I think this whole order on chaos thing is writ large in this film.
Yeah, definitely. And the film has gone on to be very, very influential. So in the Sight and Sound poll of 2022, which I voted in, it was number 6. However, in the directors poll, where they do a separate poll of directors, and it was number 1 in the directors poll, which totally tracks because so many directors have mentioned this film as a key influence. I mean, obviously Christopher Nolan, James Cameron, Gaspar Noé, Jonathan Glazer, Alfonso Cuarón, Claire Denis, and they've all made films which definitely... Alex Garland is another one. George Lucas. They've all made films that feel very indebted. They've all made at least one film that's clearly indebted to 2001.
It's the sci-fi film that launched all sci-fi films that came after it. I think its influence is so strong. And not just sci-fi films, it's like even The Simpsons have all these gags, the 2001 gags and stuff, I mean, there's no Star Wars without 2001. I mean, the opening of Star Wars is like when you first see the Discovery and the camera tracks along the whole length of the ship. George Lucas just rips that off entirely for the opening of A New Hope with the Star Destroyer. And it's the same kind of model work and things like that. And and Douglas Trumbull, who did all the effects, he would go on to work with Spielberg on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He worked on Blade Runner. He would direct his own films. He directed Silent Running, Brainstorm, which is a favourite of mine. And with Christopher Nolan, I mean, Interstellar is very much his 2001. And even Inception, like the big hotel fight scene is a centrifuge set that they built so they could rotate it. And all the wire work and stuff, like all the wire work in 2001, like in this book they were reading, like they set it up so like the wires were always blocked by the bodies of the actors, so they wouldn't have to scrub them out in post, so they were built to be hidden. So even the wire work and stuff that they did with the actors would have influenced all these films that came after.
Under the Skin with Jonathan Glazer, the opening of Under the Skin, which I think is one of their best films made this century, is very 2001-ish. And, of course, that's about an alien coming to Earth. And that also very much plays with ideas around, like, predator and prey and violence and instinct that are also in 2001.
And also, because I think even though it's, like, the definitive sci-fi film and they were trying to improve on all the ones that came before, it was still part of this tradition of like a clean looking future. We're saying all the whites, everything's white, and like you think about like all the spaceships in like the 50s movies like Forbidden Planet and stuff, and everything's pristine and shiny and look, and there's no wear and tear. I mean, there's bits in 2001 like where the shuttle's coming, like when he comes from the hotel to the moon, and and the Blue Danube's playing again. And there's that, like the dome like splits open. You can see there's like scorch marks and stuff on things because it's like it's being used, and of course, but like there's this utopian kind of cleanliness to everything, and I mean, and the way that that's influenced sci-fi as a reaction to that is that you get the scuzzy, dirty sci-fi films of the 70s and 80s, like Alien. And again, Blade Runner and like this Dark Star, where it's like they're going, well, no, the future's actually going to be disgusting and grimy, and Peter Hyams would do 2010, the sequel, which is in that, because he did like Outland with Sean Connery, which is a very dirty sci-fi film, but 2010 has that dirt and filth to it, and that's set like 9 years after. It's meant to be 9 years after the original, but it's very much a film of the 80s, which is like filthy and grimy, and and even in more recent Ad Astra, that's a journey across the solar system in search, like in reaction to a signal, and that's a dirty sci-fi, like but that's maybe dirtier in the fact of like it's very dystopian in its view of a human race that's colonized the solar system. He goes to the moon and it's all just like, it feels just like a really bad airport, right, with all these advertisements and fast food joints and stuff.
And then High Life with the Claire Denis film, and that's like a prison basically in space, and so there's the dirties, and that definitely brings things back to the body. It's all of Claire Denis, all about the body and the flesh and the senses. But then towards the end of that film, there is this stepping into the infinite aspect of it that feels very indebted to 2001.
Yeah.
I think we should leave it there. It would be great if people wanted to leave reviews about the podcast, if you can help us spread the word about the podcast. Moving forward, though, over the next few months, over the summer months, we will be moving to monthly releases of episodes. And then hopefully towards the end of the year, we'll go back to fortnightly.
Until next time, dear listeners, Sci-Fright's out.
Yep.